Louis Quilico was one of the leading operatic baritones of the 20th century. His sudden passing on July 15th, 2000 was a great loss to the musical world. Quilico performed at many of the world's great opera houses: Covent Garden, the Paris Opera, the Bolshoi, and the Vienna Staatsoper, to name only a few. He was a stalwart of the Metropolitan Opera, appearing nearly 300 times over 25 consecutive years. At the Met, he sang under the baton of James Levine, Zubin Mehta, Richard Bonynge and Claudio Abbado, and alongside tenors including Luciano Pavarotti, Placido Domingo, John Vickers and José Carreras, and sopranos Joan Sutherland, Renata Tebaldi, Renata Scotto, and Beverly Sills. Louis Quilico was an ideal interpreter of the great Italian and French composers, but it was his defining portrayal of Rigoletto, the hunchbacked jester in Verdi's tragic masterpiece, that won him international acclaim, as well as the nickname Mr. Rigoletto. He sang the role more than 500 times, the last being at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa in September of 1994. After his retirement from the operatic stage in 1998, he continued to perform, touring extensively with his wife, the celebrated pianist Christina Petrowska Quilico. Together they made 4 recordings and a teaching video, and collaborated on the book Mr. Rigoletto in Conversation with Louis Quilico. In this book, Quilico shared his views on singing, on opera, and on his signature role, Rigoletto. He also talked about his own personally devised vocal techniques, sharing them with a new generation of singers. What is missing in the printed version of these conversations is Quilico's own voice and his unique personality. In these recordings, we hear him speak in his own words, with his own voice, unfiltered and unedited. Speaking personally, baritone Louis Quilico, Mr. Rigoletto, in conversation with Christina Petrowska Quilico. In this conversation, Louis talks about good advice he received from the legendary Swedish tenor Jussi Björling, and about how he discovered his own vocal technique, which kept his career going for years.
What was the story you had told me about not vocalizing, that you only have, say, 3,000 performances? Who told you that?
This was said to me by Jussi Björling. I was doing a performance with him, and I don't remember if it was the 3rd or the 4th performance I was doing with him.
Of what
I was doing Manon Lescaut. And all of a sudden I complained that I had not vocalized and this and that, you know. And the first thing he asked me, he says, "Do you vocalize a lot, young man?" I said, "Oh yes, I have to vocalize a lot." He says, "Do me a favor. Remember one thing I'm going to tell you. God has given you 2 little vocal cords. He gave you that to sing, let's say, 3,000 performances. Well, if you vocalize too much, each time you vocalize, you do a performance. That means, what you want to do, vocalizing, or you prefer to do a performance?" And that's what he said. Another thing that he said to me, and I did not understand at first, I understand much later, he says, "Young man," he says, "vocalize are made for you to understand what you are doing." And I said, "But what am I supposed to understand?" You know, at first, because I did not understand much about the vocal approach and all that. I used to sing, I had a nice voice and all that, but the real the real technique of the sense of the word, how to produce the voice, I did not know. And this is the reason that I think he was trying to anchor in my mind how to think to come about to be able to sing. And I've thought about it. I thought so many times, and so much. The first thing I know that it was coming out of my ears, but I never got tired, because for me that was very important. And the time I really discovered my technique is when I put myself at a wall. And when I say this to people, I know it makes them laugh, but I put myself at the wall, and I would be at that wall maybe in one afternoon, sometime 3 to 4 hours. And 3 or 4 hours, I would make maybe 1, maybe 2 sounds. The rest of the time, I didn't make 1 sound. I wanted to discover it. I wanted to feel. And nobody never told me you have to try to feel to discover the sound. No. Nobody ever told me that. It came from my own deduction. I used to say, I watch them sing. I hear what they're doing. It's too easy. What is it they're doing? And finally, my walls serve its purpose. All of a sudden, I felt the sound. And I felt, not that I made it.
Well, that spiritual experience has allowed you to sing for so many years.
Absolutely.
With such a technique.
Yeah.
And makes it sound easy.
Well, the point is, I have to say that the most important thing in singing, if you want to make a beautiful sound, you have to feel beautiful. If you don't feel beautiful, don't try to make a beautiful sound. Because if mentally you are frustrated, what do you think is going to come out? A frustrated sound. No matter what anybody will tell you. Why do you think a man like, when I look at Pavarotti, for instance, I'm talking about him because I'm so used to him, because I know him better than anybody else. There's a lot of others that, exactly. But when you look at Luciano, sing with him with so many years, that when was the time for him to sing, nothing else counted in life. That was it. Sometimes I wonder if himself, it's very possible that he would say it or something like that, but I'm sorry to say it. When you make these kind of sound, there's only one way to make them. You have to be very beautiful inside. Because it gives you freedom. When you're frustrated, there's no more freedom. Your mind is preoccupied. I saw myself waking up in the morning, then all of a sudden, it's the time to sing for me. Well, during the afternoon, I would forget, and that was it. That's the only way to do it. Take off away from you the frustration. That's very important.
You sound like a Zen Buddhist monk. But
if that's the way I got to be, I'll stay like that. That's, for me, that's very important.
For every artist to find an inner peace and to be able to communicate it to the audience, because you're a physical instrument.
Yeah.
Not so much as an author or an artist that can do it visually. They can have great anger or rage, but technically you have to be at peace to be able to have a technique.
Absolutely. It's like I said, and I will repeat it, the only way to make a beautiful sound, be beautiful inside. And you see it all the time. People who are kind of frustrated, they cannot get out of their frustration. Listen to them. You will notice one thing. It doesn't work. Unless, like I said before, if you're working too much, and the first thing you know, well, there's a it's not a frustration. Physically, you're too tired. But you know what happened at that point? When you're tired, you become frustrated very easy. Because you hear your son, it's not exactly your own. But if you are intelligent enough, the moment you have that you feel that frustration taking over, it's for you to stop and think, be like a computer machine. I am like a computer. When I got problem vocally, what do? I stop and start to think from my toe to my hair. And that's how I discover it all the time. Oh, I remember once one season at the Met, all of a sudden there was a wobble, and I did not like it. It took me about maybe 3-4 performances before I realized that I had that anyway, it was frustrating. And when I saw like that, like I said, I started to listen to myself, and all of a sudden I started to think, not to listen, but to think, what is wrong with me? And I found it right away. Support wasn't there. All of a sudden I was too much anchored that I was not beautiful enough. That means I started to do like many singers will do, get in, bring up, not to show too much that you're a little bit fatty. But the first thing I know, I had no more control of the air. That's why the control was gone, and all of a sudden there was a little wobble. I corrected that. I'll tell you one thing. Yes, sir.
And getting back to Rigoletto, what else happened in Russia that had something to do with scenery?
That was very funny. That one, I've got to say it because it is something I didn't expect at all. All of a sudden, we came in, and each time we rehearsed in Russia, there was no time to really to do anything in the scenery. We were rehearsing in the hall, and they would tell me a few things, but certain things they were forgotten, But you do what you can. That's it, And in general, what happened with the other artists, especially if you're a guest, well, they abide to what you're doing, Anyway, they had said something but I had not completely understood. And all of a sudden, I finished the first act, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, I'm wondering, I had forgotten what am I supposed to, where am I going now? And I'm standing right there, and I could hear everybody screaming, "Hey!" They were talking to me in Russian. I could not understand nothing, till all of a sudden, I'm so engaged by this that all of a sudden I feel. But I says, this is stupid. And all of a sudden, I look on one side and I look on the other side. There's two walls coming towards me. And I'm going to be cut like a sandwich between, And I tell you one thing, that was very funny. I got out of that bloody thing as fast as I could, I can tell you that. And there was another thing while I'm thinking about it. I was doing Rigoletto. And all of a sudden, you would come at one town, you arrive like the night before, and you go to bed, and the next day you wake up and you go to the theater. And most of the theater, they would have a group of artists there, the one that usually do Rigoletto, they would be there to show them how you do it, And all of a sudden I come to that theater, and all of a sudden we start the rehearsal, and the soprano is there, And all of a sudden they said to me, the gentleman there, the tall gentleman there, is the one who does the Rigoletto in the house, And I'm rehearsing, and all of a sudden I could see this man, always smiling, I said, "This is funny." I says, "It's getting to be ridiculous, And all of a sudden, I looked at him a little bit more, and all of a sudden I could see one shoulder lower than the other, And he's smiling. I says, "God, that." All of a sudden I turned towards my interpreter, and I says, "Please, would you tell this gentleman not to laugh and to this performance is going to be my performance, not his performance, because he's singing, not singing, but he's saying the words at the same time. All of a sudden, naturally, I felt a little bit obstructed by the man, Anyway, we finished the rehearsal, and all of a sudden my interpreter called me and says, "Mr. Quilico, would you mind to come in another room?" I said, "Yes." And I go there, and all of a sudden, who's in the room? My tall guy there, and my soprano. And all of a sudden I walked in, and I said to the soprano, "Bravo, bravo, bravo." And all of a sudden she started to talk in Russian, and she's looking at me. And all of a sudden my interpreter, she said, "Mr. Quilico, she wants you to know that she's the wife of that gentleman. And she wants you to know why this gentleman is smiling and why he got a shoulder lower." Because I thought he was trying to, I don't know, be fresh or something like that. She said, "This young man, when he finished the conservatoire, did a concert. And in the constitution of the communism, there were certain songs he was not supposed to do. He did them just the same. And right after his concert, he was arrested, and they sent him for 7 years in the salt mine, carrying bag of salt. And she would like you to know that he was not trying to imitate you or laughing at you." I looked at her and I says, "I feel so sorry because I didn't expect it." But I says, for me, for a moment, it was. She says, "It's understandable. Don't worry about it." But they wanted me to know why this man was doing that.
What about the constant smile, though?
She says, I asked. I'm very happy you asked about it. She said, "But why was he smiling all the time?" She says, "If you would have been in the the salt mine for 7 years, wouldn't you be smiling today?" I says, "I would be smiling for the rest of my life, I can tell you that." And it was true. He was happy to be liberated,
What about in Bokabis?
Baku.
In Baku.
Baku, a very funny experience happened there, that one. I was doing Rigoletto, always Rigoletto. And all of a sudden, I finished my famous aria, Cortigiani, and all of a sudden I could hear the public going, "Ooh, ooh." And for me, man, well, boo, boo, And I said, "Well, I guess I don't sing that well today. What can you do? I cannot sing well all the time." Anyway, we finished that act. All of a sudden comes the end of the act, and all of a sudden we come out to take our curtain bow. The soprano is with me. And we go out to take our curtain bow, and all of a sudden I could see all the instrumentalists, bang, 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 and I could see the public screaming like mad. But the only thing I could hear is boo, boo. I says, "My God!" I said, "This is a crazy country." I says, "I don't have the foggiest idea what they're talking about." I said, "I'm going home," and I walked out. And all of a sudden the soprano comes right after me, and they scream, "Boo, boo!" And all of a sudden, she grabs me, and we go out again. And the same bloody thing. I get out again, and she comes in and grabs me and brings me back on the stage. And all of a sudden, I said to her, "Well, what's the matter?" And she doesn't know because she spoke only Russian. And vendetta. Finally, I understood what she meant. They wanted the bis.
An encore.
I felt so stupid because after the Cortigiani, that's what happened. And I didn't know, when you're not used to these things, That was Baku, dear old Baku.
Want to take a minute?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about some of the Rigoletto performances at the Paris Opera?
Well, there was one especially I did, and all the time I was in Paris, I did 9 performances officially announced, because I refused to do it for one reason. They wanted me to do Rigoletto in French, and I hated the French translation, and I had to do Rigoletto all the time, and I says no. If you want to do it in French, get somebody else. And that's what they did. They always get somebody else. And one day I started to do rehearsal with a soprano, a French soprano, and all of a sudden started to have trouble with the lady. And all of a sudden we did the performance, and after the performance she came to me and she started to scream at me that I was anti-musical and all that, and I was wondering what she was talking about. And she had forgotten what we were supposed to do in the rehearsal, and she didn't do it. And you know, the vendetta, at the end of the vendetta, you take the high note and you keep on going, you know. But her, she went 2 beats and she cut. She accused me that I was anti-musical for that. And all of a sudden I said, listen, lady, this opera is called Rigoletto. I told you at the rehearsal that's what I wanted to do. You didn't want to do it. It's not my fault. I says, this is my performance. This is not Traviata. When you do Traviata, I says, I'll do everything you want me to do. But I says, in Rigoletto, I do everything I want. Anyway, we had a bad encounter about this. But she had a beautiful voice, and she was a little bit stupid about the whole thing. But what can you do? One day, I'm called at the management at the Paris Opera, and they said, Mr. Quilico, we have a very special guest who's coming from Moscow, Mr. Gromyko. Oh, I said, the premiere? He said, yes. He says, we would like you to sing Rigoletto. But I says, only in French, in Italian. He said, sing it in Italian, we're going to do an Italian performance. I says, that's fine by me, good. I finished, we did the whole performance. There was a lot of people. You know, the thing that used to drive me insane with them, when they would do it with a French baritone, after the performance, if you had 1 curtain call or maybe 2 curtain call, you have done it. When I did my 9th performance, each time I did a performance, there was 15 up to 20, and some performances up to 25 curtain call. I used to count them, and I used to say to myself, but they understand what they have in the house? I mean, I don't want to brag about it, but I'm a hell of a good Rigoletto, if it's not maybe the best in the world there was. And they didn't care about that, you know, because they're Frenchmen. They're very cuckoo about that, you know. Anyway, I agreed to do that performance. And all of a sudden we started, and we went on, and it was a great success. Like I said, there was a lot of public, and because in Paris, that's what they used to do. They would take a performance and all of a sudden receive a guest. After the performance, I knew that I was going to Russia a month later. And all of a sudden I saw Mr. Gromyko, and I said, Mr. Gromyko? He said, yes. I says, I want you to know that I'm very happy to have sang for you tonight. I says, it's a kind of an audition, joking about it. And I says, I'm going to be in your country in exactly about 1 month. And I says, I'm going to do some Rigoletto over there too. Oh, he says, I'm very happy that you're coming. It's very nice. I love very much what you did tonight and everything. But he says, if ever you need me, he says, call me. And I should have taken his phone number, but I didn't want to disturb him for that. Who needs Mr. Gromyko when you're in Russia? Well, I should have taken it. Because the month later, when I went to Russia, all of a sudden I had not my visa. I'd forgotten to make my bloody visa in Ottawa, for instance. I had to go to Ottawa, but I had no time. And the first thing I know, I didn't do the visa. And when I came to Moscow, first I went to Romania. And in Romania, I thought I was going to find a Russian consul, but there was no Russian consul. There was no way I could make my visa. Well, they shipped me out. I arrived in Moscow on Saturday, about 1:30, and all of a sudden I arrive at the airport and I come to the officer and give him my passport, and he start to go through the passport, trying to find the visa, but there was no visa. He says, "Visa." I says, "Sir, I don't have a visa." I said, "Make me one." And I have to say one thing: I had a bad day that day, and then when I have got a bad day, don't push me too much. Anyway, while I was talking to him, two girls came right next to me, and he said, "Mr. Quilico." I said, "Yes, I want you to know I'm your interpreter, and this is the Canadian ambassador's secretary." "Oh," I says, "Wonderful, wonderful. What's the matter?" I said, "Well, we have a little problem here. I did not make my visa." I said, "But Mr. Quilico, you cannot come in Russia if you don't have a visa." I said, "Listen, girl, I'm here." I says, "Let's do something." I says, "I want you to know that if you start to call now, I know that in Russia you work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day." She said, "Oh no, Mr. Quilico." The interpreter said to me, "Oh no, we have the English week." It was very funny to hear this from the Russian. Well, I says, "What are we going to do?" She says, "Well, we don't know exactly." About an hour later, I called the girls and I said, "Listen, what is happening?" "Mr. Quilico, we won't be able to make a visa. You'll have to stay here for the weekend." I says, "Where?" She says, "Here at the hotel." I says, "Can you show me the hotel?" I don't know why I asked that. I says, "Can you show me that?" I had premonition of something funny. She says, "Come here, I'm going to show it to you." She showed me a building that had windows, but bars in the window. But I says, "You're stupid. This is a prison." I says, "This is not a hotel." I says, "You find me a visa, because if you don't get me a visa," I says, "I'm going right back to Canada, and that's it. You'll have to answer." All of a sudden, she goes on the phone again, blah, 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 blah. Finally, she comes back. She says, "Listen, Mr. Quilico, there is no way, we don't know what to do." I says, "You do me a favor. You are my interpreter. Call me the officer, and you're going to ask him exactly what I'm going to ask you. You're going to translate." She goes and gets the officer. The officer comes in and said, "Would you ask him the private number of Mr. Grominko?" But she said, "Mr. Quilico, you're not allowed to call a premier." I says, "I don't ask you a question. I want you to ask this gentleman the private number." She turns around. She start to talk to him. Grominko, oh my God. And all of a sudden, she said, "I don't know what to do." I says, "Well, very simple." I says, "Get me in." All of a sudden, the officers start to talk, and he said, more or less, my interpreter, plus the secretary of the Canadian ambassador who was there, he asked me to leave my passport at the airport. I says, "That's fine." When the ambassador secretary heard this, he says, "Oh no, Mr. Quilico, you don't leave your passport." I says, "Listen, I'm going to take a passport. I'm going to give him my passport. He's going to give me a receipt. I'm giving you the receipt. Every night at 6 o'clock, I'm going to call you. If I don't call you, start to search." That's all I can tell you. Good. That's what happened. When I said it to the Canadian ambassador that I was in Russia for 2 weeks without a visa, he couldn't believe it. He said, "Mr. Quilico, it is not possible in this country. You don't come in." I says, "Dear ambassador," I says, it's not a visa. I've got a letter, let me in Russia, but it's not my visa." Anyway, 3 days or 4 days later, my interpreter comes to me and she said, "Mr. Quilico, you must have been joking about Grominko." I says, "Oh, I never joke about these things, you know." But she says, "He's our premier and you're not allowed to call him." I says, "You're not allowed to call him." But I says, "I'm allowed." She says, "Who gives you the permission?" I says, "Well, this is very simple. It's him." She says, "What do you mean by that?" I says, "Well, a month ago he came to Paris. I sang for him at the Paris Opera. I sang for him a performance. And after the performance, we were introduced. And I told him that I was coming to Russia. They told me if I needed anything to call him. I says, that is the difference between you and me. I had the priority to be able to call him. She could not understand that. It was quite something.
Well, we'll return to Russia later on, but back to Rigoletto. What was your worst performance? And
Well,
why?
I have to say one thing. It may be not one of the worst, but it's not far to be one of the worst. The one in Santiago, California.
San Diego.
San Diego, not Santiago. San Diego. It's California, you know?
Yeah.
And the point is, the problem was that I had a contact
Well,
that.
you mentioned that.
I did?
Yeah. We scratched that. No, you have another production that was close to being as bad as that in Montreal.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, but if I'm going to say maybe my worst production to be part of was in Montreal, the last Rigoletto I've done. Because, you know, I don't want to brag about it, but I'm one of the greatest Rigoletto in the world. And all of a sudden, when you give me a pupil from school to be prima donna, I'm sorry to say it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry to say it. It's not because I had anything against the kids, because they were wonderful and everything, but that's not the way to do it, you know. When you sing with the Sparafucci, you know, that this guy's got a long sword, he can kill you any moment, and you have to come at the point you have to scare yourself because of him. I'm sorry to say it. No, it was said to me, Louis, cancel that. You're going to be very unhappy. And I didn't follow. And it is true.
What was the story about the sword?
Well, the sword, no. I'm just talking about the sword. That you know, it's there was nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, the children, I need reaction from these people. I had no reaction. The Gilda sang very beautifully. She had a beautiful voice. She was the right size and everything. But my God, she was talking about her mother like she was talking about, let's go to the corner at the tavern. You know, I need to be fed. And after doing so many performances of it, and all of a sudden coming down to that, it was, I practically said to myself, why did I ever sing this opera here?
So a lack of depth, a lack of energy.
Oh, everything.
Can a stage director not help with that type of situation?
No way. No way. Conductor, director, no way. If your partner across from you cannot help you. And I remember I've done something once. I did the Rigoletto in McAllen, Texas once. And the soprano was a young soprano. She was 24 years old. And she was becoming a superstar of the Met. But me, I was not with the Met at that time. And all of a sudden, you could feel it. They wish she would look at me. Who do you think you are? You know, I'm from the Met. You're not from the Met. And all of a sudden, it was so far remote. She was never with me, so far remote that all of a sudden I stopped the rehearsal. And I grabbed her and I said, you sit right here. I says, you know how powerful is Rigoletto? She says, I know. But I says, my dear girl, if I get mad, when I'm going to finish my performance right now, people will not even remember your performance. I says, let's do something. Let's play together. Let's be together. And you're gonna thank me for it. She thanked me every single performance. She came to me, she says, Mr. Quilico, it was wonderful what you've done. And I'm very happy that you brought me back to earth. You know, because I'm not alone. She's not alone. Everybody is there, you know? And that is the thing that is terrible, that you feel that you are by yourself and she's by herself. Who cares that? Who wants that? You don't need that. You know?